So, Alexander, it has been a long time after Minsk agreements that the positional combats in Donbass haven't ceased yet. There are recurrent serious amplifications of the conflict, and it seems never ending. What are the main reasons for this?
The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, in over 1,000 published daily reports, has indeed established the fact that the fighting in the eastern part of the country continues. These facts are being made public every day in 3 languages, in Russian, Ukrainian and English, on the website accessible for all participating states and the signatories to the Minsk agreements. There had been some achievements since the signing of these agreements, and also these achievements have been reflected in our report. Some weapons have been withdrawn. There had been some easing of the fighting. However, ultimately, the solution for finding an end to this conflict is depending on the political will of the parties, and it is the signatories' failure and not that of the Minsk agreements if that will does not materialize.
Next question. Which of the parties seems more inclined towards ending the conflict, and which of them is making the most provocations?
This is a question that we have been asked several times, and it's a question that is almost impossible to answer. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission establishes, however, that both sides to the conflict do violate their agreements, their promises. They have weapons in areas where they shouldn't be. They continue to fire. Some call it returning fire. It is nonetheless firing, which is specifically mentioned as one of the key cornerstones of the agreement. Ceasing the fire, withdrawing the heavy weapons, disengaging, and taking care of the local populations. These would be key measures that would be required to end the fighting. Once again, ultimately, this fighting will only end if there is sufficient political will to do so, and it is not the failure of the agreements if that will does not materialize. It's the failure of the signatories, and the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission will continue to document whether they continue to fail or they will succeed in living up to their promises.
Okay, the next question. Would you submit your opinion on what is necessary for ceasing the conflict?
Can you repeat again?
Your opinion on what is necessary for ceasing the conflict?
First of all, and I repeat here, what is required is political will to implement the agreements that have long been signed on the dotted line in Minsk. And these measures that have been agreed are clear to everyone. It starts with ceasing the fire, it continues with the withdrawal of heavy weapons, and it moves to disengagement of the forces where they're too close, which all should help and assist to protect the most vulnerable part of the society in this conflict, which are the civilians that continue to live in and around the areas where fighting continues now into the 3rd year. It is the failure of the signatories if that will does not materialize, and it is not the failure of the agreements.
Okay, and how do you estimate the Donbass conflict? Is it anti-terrorist operation, Russian military aggression against Ukraine, civil war, or anything else?
It is an armed conflict that the mission has been documenting from its start to now for far too long. The mission itself is in its 4th year now. The conflict is raging for over 3 years now. It is time that the sides make clear that they can and will implement their agreements they have signed on the dotted line in Minsk.
Considering the beginning of the conflict, would you provide us with generalized information about the crimes performed by both sides, namely in terms of use of illegal weapons or unprovoked fire on civilian objects?
The conflict has evolved over time. It was very unpredictable, fluid, and there was no contact line in the early days of the armed conflict in 2014. It has then moved towards now a rather static exchange of fire at this contact line, while we still see movements towards that contact line by both sides. What is most worrying is that the fighting the hotspots where we see almost 90% of the fighting is taking place in or around built-up areas. Large population centers such as Donetsk city, Avdiivka, Horlivka, and numerous villages along the contact line are at the center of these hotspots. These villages are not just at the contact line itself, but they're also being used as positions. And because there are military hardware and positions in these built-up areas, these positions come under fire, they attract retaliatory fire, and it's unavoidable that then civilian buildings and civilians themselves get injured and killed. This conflict does not use precision weapons. This conflict uses indiscriminate weapons, and civilians pay the highest price. We have confirmed this year alone over 260 civilian casualties.
And does the OSCE mission in Ukraine have enough opportunities and support to determine a precise picture of violations of the agreements? For instance, when shelling happened, do you know who fired first, what type of weapon was used, was the shooter provoked, exactly where the shooters were positioned, who started to move in the gray zone and to the other side, etc.?
It is the will of the sides to let us do our job. We have a clear mandate which says that we have access to any areas of Ukraine. This has also been reiterated and agreed in the Minsk agreements, and there are clear responsibilities on the signatories to enable the mission to do its job. Because they fail to do that, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission only sees some of the violence that is taking place, and this has always been the case ever since the beginning of the conflict. There is only one reason why the sides do not allow us to access certain areas. It's because they do not want us to register the violations they commit in these areas where restrictions do take place. Detecting violations and reporting violations is communicating uncomfortable truths. It is that reason that motivates the signatories to prevent us doing our job. Where we see a gun being fired, where we do see the direction of a projectile in flight, where our cameras register an exchange, a frantic exchange, all of that will be documented. Where we don't see it, we do not speculate, but there are sufficient number of cases where we have very clear indications who is the culprit of a violation. I just refer to all those violations where we see weapons in areas where they shouldn't be. It is very clear in which areas these weapons are, and it's very clear who controls the area where these weapons are. Therefore, there is no doubt who is the violator in these cases. And equally, it applies to almost all violations where our restriction of movement is at stake. And also there, it is absolutely clear which of the signatories is to blame. What we require is action, measurable action, to implement these agreements and to ensure that our mandate, agreed by 57 participating states, including Ukraine and the Russian Federation, is fully respected.
There are claims for both sides in the armed conflict that they deliberately fired on civilian objects, residential and public places within their territories, in order to blame the other side. Are these assertions serious or part of propaganda war, and did you observe such incidents?
As I've mentioned before, a vast majority of the fighting does take place in built-up areas. Positions are built in towns, in villages, at the borders of towns, at the border of villages. These positions, this military hardware attracts counter-fire, it attracts retaliatory fire, and unavoidably, in this exchange, the buildings nearby will be targeted, will be affected, civilians will get hurt and will be killed. The vast majority of the civilian casualties that we have been registering have been killed or have been injured by shrapnel, meaning by the use of weapons that should have long been withdrawn. It is the task of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to establish the facts. It is the reports that we publish every day that contribute to an objective picture in order to counter the vast information that is subjective and not reflecting the facts on the ground. This is our contribution to finding a solution to the conflict based on our information. Decision makers can make important and difficult decisions.